Well, we're talking with the top four candidates for the Republican nomination for the 3rd Congressional District, the top four fundraising candidates, that is. And we're so glad to have with us today, to join us now in the studio, Stuart Ray. And Mr. Ray, thanks for coming by today. And
call me Stuart, and thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Taking some time out of your busy campaign schedule.
Yeah, sure.
Which folks are now fully engaged, I think, on this and
for
the primary. So, and the primary is next Tuesday. So,
Yes.
but you know, you talk a lot about your background in business and also in government.
Right.
You have a background in both. Tell us about how that and how you believe that would be helpful to you in this congressional seat that you're seeking.
Sure. And for the most part, I grew up here in Louisville, so this is my hometown and love it here. Went to Ballard High School, and everybody has to answer that question when you're from Louisville. Where'd you go to high school?
Right.
And so I've loved my community, but did go to work early on at Steel Technologies, a company my father founded, and I put 30 years in at Steel Technologies in a variety of capacities, and it was great, and we loved it. The company did get acquired a couple of times, and so about 10 years I left to build my own businesses, Peregrine, which is in the metals and trucking business. So jobs, economic development, those type of opportunities come natural to me. To your point, I have been appointed to a couple of public boards and commissions here in Kentucky, and have dabbled a little bit and seen politics from a board or a commission standpoint, but have looked for an opportunity to serve the community in this kind of capacity, and decided to jump in the congressional race.
And you've been appointed by both Democrats and Republicans.
I have. I was appointed to the Department of Fish and Wildlife by Governor Steve Beshear and served 4 years there, the last 2 years as chairman of the department, and felt we did collectively as a 9-member commission did a very good job with the department. And then was appointed to the KFC Yum Center, the Arena Authority board, by both Beshear, and then represented Governor Bevin for a couple of years on that board as well. And we made it financially viable pre-COVID hitting, and then so I spent 4 years on that board as well.
You know, Stuart, conventional wisdom says this is a really blue district.
Yes.
That's gotten bluer.
Yes.
Since Representative Ann Northrup represented this district in Congress for a decade,
Sure.
1997 to 2007. What can Republicans learn from her when she was so successful when other Republicans have not been?
Yeah, she was, and she's actually a mentor of mine, and I've looked up to her. She was that was some of the early political involvement I had, was helping her, doing some fundraising and really learning how Ann did it. I admire her a lot. I'd kind of like to think I'd be that type of congressman, although she was a great congresswoman. And she represented the community as a whole. She really did. She was well admired by every aspect of our community, both the south side and the west side and the east side. We don't have much of a north for the river, but she really represented the entire community, did a lot of wonderful things. I think we can credit our bridges, our new bridges, both on the east end and the downtown bridge. She brought a lot of funding to the west end. They have fond memories of Ann, and I'd like to emulate her.
Well, this is kind of a job interview.
Yeah, sure.
Today,
I feel like
the
that.
voters are deciding. They're
Yeah.
going to make their decision. If they hire you to be the Republican
Yes.
nominee, what's going to differentiate you from Senator McGarvey, who's likely to be the Democratic candidate?
Sure.
What differences do you see there?
Everything.
Okay. Well, give us a couple.
Yeah, between me and Morgan McGarvey, I've been a businessman and an outsider. I've grown businesses successfully. Morgan, from literally about the time he left university, went into state politics. So I kind of consider Morgan a professional career politician. He's served a long time. He is in the minority in the Senate. I suspect if he were to be elected into Congress, he'd maintain that position as a minority if we get a majority of Republicans. So I feel like he's comfortable there. I would lead. I would love to be in the majority in Congress and lead in the best interest of our community and bring jobs, bring businesses here. Lots of differences between where Morgan's positions would be and myself.
Had you been a member of Congress when both the COVID relief and infrastructure bills came up, how would you have voted on those?
Yeah, that's tough because the COVID relief, certainly I would have hands down been supportive of it immediately. Having experienced it, unprecedented pandemic, and saw what it did to our country, individuals and the economy and businesses, and I'd never dreamed that you could just flip a switch and shut the economy off like that. Right or wrong, that's what happened. So the COVID relief funding, I think, was very, very necessary. The next one, I would have loved to have seen trimmed significantly. It was $1.4 trillion, hard to believe. We say those words, T's, $1.4 trillion, and I would say 50% of it at least was a lot of pork in that bill, and I would have loved to have seen that cut way back, and hopefully if we had a Republican-controlled House, we could do that. But if I was in the position I was in, I would have probably, because I'm a big infrastructure guy and I love to see infrastructure spending, I think it's good for the economy, and being a guy in the trucking business, I think it's very important for the country to improve their infrastructure. So that's much needed. I would have probably voted for it because of the infrastructure side, which was probably $750 billion.
Well, one of the steps of progress we made here in the state is the Bluegrass Institute recommended that the dollars raised by the gasoline tax actually be used for what they're supposed to be used for, which is infrastructure. And to the legislature's credit, they've quit sweeping those funds out of those. So we have more funding available to repair our roads and bridges and build them. So let's stay with the economy for a minute. How big of a threat is this run-up of inflation that we see to both our economy and to the business community from your perspective?
Sure. No, I think it's a terrible threat. You know, a lot of young people have never seen interest rates go up in their life. I mean, people that are involved, they've never seen an increase in interest rates. I do go back to the late 70s. I was a young man, but my father was building steel technologies, and there was 18 to 20% interest rates. If these interest rates continue to go up, it's going to be a huge burden, and it will bring a recession, unfortunately. I hate to be a naysayer predictor, because really I'm an optimist, and I want to drive the economy forward by reducing spending and putting more money back in the pockets of Americans for reinvestment.
Yeah. Let's turn to foreign policy for a moment. In an earlier interview that you did, you made the comment to the effect that America should be a clear leader of the free world, and I think most Republicans would agree with that rhetoric. But what specifically does that mean for you? You know, how does that play out in a situation like what we're seeing in Ukraine, for example? How do we be that leader but still maintain our interests?
Right. Well, I think, again, specifically to Ukraine and Russia, I think we could have literally acted much sooner when we saw 150,000 troops building on the border of Ukraine, Russia building those troops on the border of Ukraine. It was no surprise it was going to happen. Apparently it was a surprise to Congressman Yarmouth, because 2 weeks prior on Terry Miners, he literally said he didn't think Russia was that big of a threat to Ukraine and thought this was, I'm paraphrasing, much ado about nothing. And then 2 weeks later, the invasion occurs. So I think we need to lead, not always necessarily with our troops and militarily, but certainly with military support where we could bring them arms sooner. The sanctions should have been implemented much harder and sooner against Russia to help the people of Ukraine. But there's a lot more to answering that question, including human rights issues, when there's violations of human rights. And anytime we have an ally and a democracy that I believe we should support, we have an obligation to do that one way or another.
Is it about what you project ahead of time, though, being proactive? In other words, had there been a different, say that Donald Trump had been reelected, do you think it would have been a different an environment or a response to that?
I don't know about a response. I do think that certainly President Trump put off a significantly different vibe or a different presence.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, versus President Biden as it relates to the relationship that we have with Russia and Putin and the world. So would it have been different? Yeah, I certainly think it would have been different. Although I don't know that President Trump was acting in a very supportive way of Ukraine in his day, but the Republicans were trying to mount support for Ukraine earlier.
You've expressed some concern about the Jefferson County public schools and education.
Yes.
This is, and school choice has become a much more of an issue during these recent campaigns, especially since parents found out during the pandemic what was not happening in their schools. There's a lot of concern about school choice. The Biden administration is attempting to stymie the growth of charter schools by making it more difficult for them to have access to federal funding. When we see some of the achievement gaps between black and white students in Kentucky, we know in other states charter schools are helping close those. What can you do as one congressman in 435? What can you do to help with this situation?
Well, I applaud Frankfurt for passing their charter school bills and support. I think that was a very good move. Obviously, I'm a competition person. I think the only way to raise all people and all boats is by raising the competitive atmosphere, and charter schools clearly do that when it comes to public schools. It's not an anti-JCPS approach. It's really a pro-student.
Well, these are public schools.
Yeah, and it's being an advocate for the student, the students, and giving the parents and the students more options. I think now we need to see the professionals that do that come in and financially support these schools, and it doesn't leave children out because often funds go from a public school to a charter school, and it'd be opportunities for teachers to work in a different atmosphere. And I know that those JCPS schools that I'm a proud product of will start to compete. Many of them already are. We have some schools that are doing a great job out there. Unfortunately, JCPS does drag down Kentucky's average as a whole, and we need to make sure every school in every corner of this community is doing a great job for the students.
Well, sometimes, you know, when somebody runs for office from a business background, they tend to focus pretty heavily on economic issues and maybe avoid or don't talk as much about social or moral issues. What would be your approach as a congressman? This audience, for example, watching this program, will be very concerned about religious liberties and their individual freedom. How do you see government's role in protecting those liberties?
Well, they have to protect those liberties, and really government needs to stay out of the way as it relates to religious liberties, and certainly I'll fight for the constitutional freedoms and the amendments that are in place. So I don't necessarily avoid or sidestep all social issues, but I do think when it comes to whether it's areas of our community that are underperforming, I do have a tendency to believe if we had greater economic development opportunities in those areas, it leads to really good paying jobs.
It's a ripple effect.
Yeah, and then that leads to improved housing areas, and I still think affordable housing is a great paying job, a low interest rate, and an ability to purchase a house. So those are my approaches that do trickle down into social areas.
Stuart Ray, that time goes by fast.
It does go by fast.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
for
Jim. I
coming
appreciate
by.
it.
Good luck on the race. Best wishes.
Thank
to
you very much.
And thanks for joining us.